What's shaking, my friends? My name is Shay. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to talk about my quarterly wrap up. So just some quick stats of how I did in the months of January, February, and March. I read to completion 45 books. I DNF'd 3 books, and it wound up to be a total of 15,557 pages. Now, what I found interesting also was looking at my breakdown of 1 star to 5 stars, and I only gave 6% of the books that I read in these 3 months 5 stars. I also kind of kept on par with 39% of my books being fantasy reads, and the next runner up is going to be 28% romance reads, and the rest of the genres sprinkled throughout. I also read, interestingly, 74% female authors. I also had 24% of the books I read were new 2022 releases, and then the other rest of that was made up. 21% was 2021 releases, and then the rest of those were backlist titles. So quickly, we are going to get into some of my hits, some of my disappointments, and my worst books that I read this quarter. So to start off, we will talk about some of the best books I read in 2022 in these 3 months. And starting out, we all know on this channel, and we know that I am a huge S.A. Chakraborty fan, and I did finish up the series in January, and that's going to be The Empire of Gold. And this book just has a fantastic setting, fantastic characters, and I rarely cry in books, but this one did bring tears to my eyes, and also the second one did as well. But this is the one I read in 2022 when I finished off the trilogy. Highly recommend. This is an adult fantasy that follows our main character Nari, and she basically grows up as a con woman, and she magically summons accidentally a djinn, and he whisks her away to the magical city of Davabad, and she learns all about the politics and who she really is. And it's a fantastic read with great characters, a great setting, just absolutely. I have become a fan of S.A. Chakraborty's writing, and I will read everything she writes. Another book that I read in February was Dead Silence by S.A. Barnes. Now, I originally gave this book 4.5 stars, and I stand by that. However, I'm going to round that up to 5 stars because my absolute enjoyment of this book makes it a 5-star read. This is said to be kind of like the Titanic meets The Shining, which I can get the comparisons. This is a sci-fi horror, and it follows our basically crew who is about to be disbanded, and they go on one last mission, and while they are doing this mission, they get this distress signal, and so they decide to go check it out, and to find out that the distress signal is coming from a ship that has been lost for 20 years. And so once they decide to board the ship because they want to bring back some mementos saying, yes, I found this, and it will kind of set them up for life. Because they found this ship, some eerie things start to happen, and I am telling you, I was so entertained during this read. Highly recommend if you like sci-fi horrors. Another book that I read in the month of March would be A Thousand Splendid Suns by Khaled Hosseini, which is just another fantastical atmospheric read from him set in the Middle East that's following basically our main character from the time she's a girl to the time she is grown, and kind of how she perseveres through different things. Trigger warning for domestic violence, but this is an absolutely fantastic read, and I highly recommend it. I also read Khaled Hosseini's The Kite Runner, which you may be more familiar with, and that's a fantastic read as well. And then probably one of my absolute favorite reads of 2022 so far is going to be The Engines of Empire by R.S. Ford. This follows many perspectives, but it's following a family, the Hawkspurs, who is getting ready to take over part of the empire. The mother is ready to train her children on how to run the empire, and so she sends them off to do different tasks and to learn different things about the empire. And then there is betrayal and backstabbing, and there is magical beings and technology, and just a very great fantasy read. It is a big boy, but I adore this little floppy paperback that I have, and I would highly recommend this to anybody that is a fantasy fan. It is an adult fantasy. Now for my disappointments of 2022, and the first one I'm going to say is going to be A River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross. I had very high hopes for this book, and I read it and was just kind of let down. I felt like the marketing for it was not well. I did realize that it was going to be a fantasy romance, but I did not really jive with the romance. I was not convinced. It is basically very folklore and very atmospheric, but not a lot happens. So we have this bard who is coming back to the island, this strange, mysterious island that he left when he was younger, and he has been summoned back because his music is the only thing that will allow the island to speak to the gods and figure out who is taking girls away from the island. Basically, some girls are getting kidnapped, and it sounds like a really, really great premise, but I don't think it was a fantastic execution, and so sadly, that was a very disappointing read. Another book that was disappointing to me is going to be Small Favors by Anne Craig. I loved her first work, The House of Salt and Sorrows, and this is going to be her second novel, and it's a gorgeous, gorgeous cover, but it is a horror novel, and it's kind of in a historic setting where they are in this settlement and they are surrounded by woods, and they of course have to traverse these woods because they have to get supplies for their small village. And it starts out where the people on the supply run have all turned up dead, and so they've been brutally murdered, and it's trying to figure out what is going on. And it follows our main character, and she ends up kind of losing her family and just persevering through everything that's going on in the town. And so I really wanted to love this, but sadly I did not. Another one is How High We Go in the Dark by Sagura Nakamatsu, and this one just, I think, was marketed incorrectly. It is basically a short story collection of this pandemic, and that basically at first it just targets children, and it is very, very emotional, very trigger warning, but also just, it was short story collections and I don't get along with those very well, so they weren't really interconnected. Most of the short stories had lots of years in between them and lots of following different characters, so I would not recommend it to someone who was not a lover of short stories. And the last disappointing read I read in March, and that's going to be Shadow Black by Sebastian de Castell. I loved Spellslinger, which is the first novel in the series, and I kind of fell off with Shadow Black. It was kind of like a mystery of the week kind of deal, which I don't mind that, but I just didn't like the kind of mystery that they were solving in this particular novel. And we will go to the worst books I read in 2022 so far. Number one is going to be Reckless Girls by Rachel Hawkins. This is a thriller that is following a girl and her fiance. It's either her boyfriend or fiance, and they have been down on their luck financially, and these two girls come, these college roommates, and they offer to give them $50,000. I think it's something along those lines, to take them to this deserted island. The only issue is when they get to that deserted island, there is already somebody on the island, and it already has a very history of the island, a very spooky history, and so it kind of goes from there. I just felt like the execution was not well. The characters were not likable at all, and the way the story wrapped up and ended was just not for me. The second worst book is going to be Scorpio by J.R. McAllister, which I read recently, and this one I had really high hopes for. It's basically in a world where there's 5 kingdoms, and women have now ceased to be born. So they're trying to figure out why women have ceased to be born, what's going to happen now, because in this kind of society, women are the rulers and not the men, and so women are needed for these kingdoms to survive. And so it's following multiple different characters from every different kingdom, and it just fell flat for me. A lot of stuff just did not flow together, and it almost felt like separate stories, and then they never came together, and I just felt that the merging of the plots just was not there, and so it did not make me want to pick up the next book. And then, unpopular opinion, my worst is going to be Saga. And I know that I should not have continued on with Saga because I didn't care for the first one. But then I read the second one this year, and I know that for a fact I will not be continuing on. Like, I get the hype behind this. I understand why people like it. But it just doesn't, graphic novels in general don't really hold my interest that much. I'm not really a huge fan of them. And so this one is kind of weird and wonky, and I didn't really jive with it. And I knew I should not have picked up the second volume, but I did for a challenge in my book club. But I will not be continuing on with that either. So that's it, guys. I hope you are having a great month. Drop down in the comments below what your best books have been, what your disappointments have been, and what your worst books have been. And we can compare. Alright, I will see you guys next time.